It's very exciting to be here. Thank you very much for the organisation and for the invite. And I'm delighted to be in such a beautiful fall all day. Some of you might have spotted me earlier taking pictures from the corners. So the presentation I've put together is nominally titled Financing the Transition. My day job is funding small companies on public capital markets. We typically, I'll come back to that, we typically do transactions of up to about £20 million, although we do rather larger when we can. There we go. So Canaccord Genuity is a Canadian public company. I sit in the capital markets part of it, raising money. The largest part of it by profitability is the wealth management operation, which we're not part of, sadly, but although they are an important client to us. The London business is the smallest of our major four markets. We are the largest fundraiser on the London AIM market over the last 3, 4, 5 years. We also have a significant private sell-side business, which is really more servicing the private equity business. In London, as in all of our other big geographies, which are US, Canada, and Australia, we do the same 6 sectors, which, if I can read those correctly on there, are resources, financials, industrials, healthcare, the one I can't read upside down, tech, and sustainability, which is really where I sit. And what do I mean by sustainability? I really mean anything that is modern industrial. So it's very much what we've been talking about all through today. It's very difficult to find any industrial process nowadays that people are developing which is not in some way meeting the sustainability agenda. Now, my background, as I think some of you, I've spoken to quite a lot of you over the course of the day, is as an energy analyst. And it's worth focusing for a minute on that as a kind of top-down where this all fits in. I was checking, actually, as I was sitting in here, that I wasn't about to insult a local son. So I'm happy to report that William Jevons is from Lancashire, and there is in economics, anybody who studied economics knows something called Jevons paradox, which is allegedly the claim that if you reduce the cost of something, the demand for it goes up. It's just not true. I mean, I know people love it and they love talking about it. That top right-hand chart is a demonstration of the growth of energy demand versus GDP. You really have to squint quite hard to see any price impact. Basically, lower prices have no impact on energy demand. Higher prices have no impact on energy demand. The only thing that actually matters is economic activity. What does matter, and matters enormously, is relative prices. If your fuel or your supply cost is more expensive than other supply costs, people will do the thing that you would like to do somewhere else where it's cheaper. In my own lifetime, that goes back to, there used to be a perfectly excellent aluminium production facility in Wales. That long since closed when we realised that there were more valuable buyers of the electricity. We went through a period in Europe where we decided that we wanted to load carbon costs into cement production. And then we were very disappointed to discover that clinker manufacture almost immediately moved to Morocco. So you have to be honest with yourself as any kind of policymaker or investor, that if you try to shift energy prices, you will inevitably shift economic activity to where those energy prices are lower. Now, the good news is that is in the top left-hand chart on that slide, which is that, again, over that is slightly more than my lifetime, there has been a systematic shift in the energy intensity of our economies. Every single decade, GDP has grown by a lot more than energy demand, and with the partial exception of the beginning of this century, pretty much every decade that gap gets larger. And again, if you look at it, it's kind of another way of looking at that data on that top left-hand chart. Steadily, GDP growth is going sideways, and primary energy demand is gradually shifting down and to the left. Now, within that, and this obviously brings us to, why am I telling you this? Because we are to conversation about sustainability. Solar PV and wind are taking enormous market share. It's not a small delta anymore. If you go back to the 1990s or the early 2000s, it didn't matter that much. But when something is growing at 15 to 25% a year, fairly quickly it does become material. And where we are now, if you look in the bottom right-hand chart, and there I'll come back to what I'm doing there, you're actually starting to see that orange wedge at the top, which is solar PV and wind generation, just growing like crazy. And it's very difficult to see anything really shifting in that trend, not least because it's only really been in about the last 3 years that wind has been properly cost competitive. Sorry, a bit longer, but wind about 5 years and solar about 3 years. So it's been a really big shift in the quite recent past that's now really driving those sources of energy. Now, what I'm doing in that calculation of useful delivered energy is trying to come up with a rough estimate of the difference between, electricity as delivered pretty much is what the end user ends up using. If, on the other hand, you sell him 1 megajoule of oil, at the very best, he'll use about 30% of it, because the great bulk of it is just wasted in exhaust heat somewhere in the process. Same isn't true for gas. Most gas is actually usefully used. Coal, very much so. Nuclear and hydro obviously don't have that difficulty. But the point is that if you go back over that period, we are pretty close, and it will depend, you can argue as to whether it's 2023, 2024, 2025, but we are pretty close to a peak in terms of demand for those other primary sources of energy. And that's not a comment that I'm making because I'm a wild-eyed advocate or whatever. It's that orange wedge. And, the money that is going behind, the money that we've been talking about through the course of today, that's not just a UK phenomenon, that is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's having very big impacts. Now, obviously, that is also the electrification of a lot of things. And so one of the key vectors in that, of course, is lithium, which was the original excuse for us to gather today, but we've covered a lot more than that. Electrification is very interesting because it's obviously happened before. Now, because I feel slightly I'm in the graveyard slot, I thought I'd have a bit of audience participation. So this is a spot the difference game. Those are all factories. The top 3 are different to the bottom 3 in a very important energy way. Can anyone immediately tell me and embarrass me as to how? What? That is true, but both top and bottom, they are effectively production lines. They are not powered in the same way as the bottom, but it's not humans, no. The bottom 3 are electrified, exactly. The top 3 have got axle running through them somewhere. And all the power is having to come off with little chains or cables. And of course, if you go back to factories of that era, that's why they were so deadly dangerous for small children, because they were the only people who could fit in and fix the belts when they'd fallen off. Shudder slightly. But, and you'd turn the machine on, you'd have one big steam engine at the end of the line, and you'd run the whole factory, and everything would be hooped onto this one. And maybe if you had another one, you'd have some sort of complicated belt mechanism that powered the next line. We still have production lines, right? We're still looking at production lines that haven't changed that much. But what has changed is the power method. And I've been around long enough. I have a grey beard. I've seen enough predictions of change over that period. I have absolutely no idea what the factory of the future is going to look like. But what I do know is that the change will be driven by that kind of electric motor that allows you to do a much, much more concentrated, much, much smarter method of how you do assembly. And electrification is already having that impact. I was talking earlier, one of the things I get really excited about in electric vehicles is not just batteries, high power batteries. Because what high power batteries give you is they give you the ability to start replacing large systems. Maybe I don't need brakes. Maybe that's what an electric motor does for me. You get to start to take systems out as well as just add them in. And I think if I come to another example, which again is something I've spent a lot of time on recently, is what I have a colleague now who works with me who's done a doctorate in agronomy and heavy focus on vertical farming. If anyone's ever looked at a vertical farm, they're lovely things. They look very cool. None of them make any money. And the reason that they don't make any money is very simple, which is that they pay European electricity prices. And you cannot make them work with European electricity prices. What if you could make them work with some kind of cheap power, which is what we just discussed here? You get into a world where you can do things very differently, and suddenly you can grow. You've got a method. So, farming, historically, it's a method of turning land into food through oil. Now you've got a method of turning kind of empty space, that isn't very much space, into food through electricity. And again, that's the kind of thing that becomes interesting, that it's very difficult to predict reliably. Now, I did promise that I would talk a little bit about raising money, so I'll come to that now. My day job is raising money for typically small companies. They are typically either early stage revenue or indeed pre-revenue. Right now, if you came to me and said you wanted to do that, I'd have immense difficulty giving you a positive answer. But I have reason to believe it will be better in the not too distant future. But it's worth just highlighting here why it's worth bothering with that process at all. And when I used to do this exercise where I'd have school children around, and you kind of say, well, what are you buying when you buy a share in the company? And getting anyone to remember that it's as much about control as it is about price is an interesting exercise. We can do that. So as I say, we can do the public equity line. The great advantage of it is you get to keep control. The availability obviously is extremely variable. As I've just said, it's currently closed, but it will probably open again in the not too distant future. Obviously, if you're a very large company, it's always open. But then if you're a very large company, you always have options. The other options come with various strings attached or are just as variable as anything else. The other thing that I wanted to talk a bit is about how you actually raise money from strangers, because that's in a nutshell what you're doing. And I've got a slightly glib line, but investors don't actually do very many different things. They either do what they did before, they try to do what someone else did that worked, they follow a guru, or they follow a herd. And you'll notice that none of those involve dispassionate analysis of the prospects of the venture. They are very much driven by how they feel about the opportunity and the quality of the pitch. Most of the people who I am dealing with are, by definition, specialists in nothing. And almost everybody who goes into them wants to impress them with their technical knowledge. That doesn't work. They don't care about your technical knowledge. What they care about is whether you're going to keep promises that you make to them in that room, because that's pretty much the only thing they can remember. Because any technical thing you tell them, they've got no idea whether it's true or not. You could have told them the moon's made of blue cheese, and if it sounds plausible, they'll say yes, right? It provided you come back in 3 months and prove it, they'll keep buying your stock. So that's fine. Everything has to work in the transaction. You have to get all those things right. You've got to have the right people. You got the right project. The tax terms have to be all right. You can't be having a dispute with your shareholders. You've got to have all of the legal structures in position. That's all fine. The other thing is what you're solving for is not, I'm getting to free cash flow positive. What you're solving for is, can I get to the next stage and look plausible? Which is the next stage, not I'm getting all the way to free cash flow. I'm getting from here, where I am, to somewhere where I can sell more shares to someone else, and this is the reason why I'm going to be able to sell those shares to someone else. So it's not, you don't have to do the whole 9 yards in one leap. You can take some sort of shorter steps, and then the final point before I re-emphasize the promise one is that inevitably, because you're meeting people who, as I've said, are not specialists in anything, they are going to be enormously impressed if there's a partner who you've got who they've heard of. One of my biggest problems is people who've got really impressive partners and I don't know who they are. I get introduced to them as, oh yeah, that's quite interesting. Yes, Schenk. Oh yeah, big German company. Yeah, interesting. But like the kind of people I deal with just don't know who they are. So as much as possible, find somebody if you can. I've heard Trafigura thrown around. I've heard Glencore thrown around. So give me some big names that somebody with a general knowledge of business is likely to have heard of. And last point, cannot emphasize again, whatever you say in a meeting, you will be perceived to have made promises. Keep a careful track of them, either keep them or have a really good explanation why you couldn't. And that's it. Thank you for your time.